SLT Mobitel Home Broadband සමගින් non-stop ගමනකට data බෝවන්. SLT Mobitel Home Broadband සමගින් non-stop ගමනකට data බෝවන්.
දසනකාන්තී චූර්ණය සහිත ලීවර් ආයුෂ් දන්තාලේපය දත්වල ඇති ප්‍රශ්න 10ක් වළකයි.
Ranjan Ramanayaka walks out of jail after 1 year and 7 months today after receiving conditional presidential pardon. Zero tolerance. Chinese ambassador to Sri Lanka Chi Hong reiterates China's continued assistance to Sri Lanka and emphasized its lack of tolerance towards the infringement of Sri Lanka's sovereignty. Willingness. Japan expresses willingness to set up creditor conference with Sri Lankan creditors but points out to cooperation of other creditors as crucial. More assistance. UNICEF calls on international community to invest in education and health sectors affected due to economic crisis. All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9, this Friday the 26th of August 2022.
Vim Derana milliliter CA Smart Pack එක රුපියල් 85ට දැන් වෙළඳ පොලේ.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News. I'm Andrew Bernard. Now, Chinese ambassador to Sri Lanka Chi Hong emphasized China's continued support to Sri Lanka and its lack of tolerance on any infringement of the national sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity of Sri Lanka. The ambassador, through an article published today, further emphasized that some countries far or near continuously make various groundless excuses to bully Sri Lanka and trample on Sri Lanka's sovereignty and independence repeatedly. Pointing out to the 51st session of the UN Human Rights Council due to take place this month, he questioned on what the countries that preach about human rights will do to help the country given the severe economic and humanitarian difficulties the people of Sri Lanka are faced with. In an article published by Chinese ambassador to Sri Lanka Chi Hong, Sri Lanka was reassured of China's continued support towards the country in protecting its sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity. The ambassador's comments came through an article published on the title From One China Principle to Yuan Wang 5. Let's join hands and resolutely safeguard our sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity. In the article, the ambassador referred to two incidents, the visit of US Speaker of the House to Taiwan and the visit of the Chinese research vessel Yuan Wang 5, which were widely reported in Sri Lanka. The ambassador believes that even though the two matters may seem irrelevant and thousands of miles apart, both incidents share the same significance between China and Sri Lanka, that is, to jointly safeguard each other's sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity. The ambassador stated that approving a foreign vessel's port call at Hambantota or any other port for replenishment is a decision made by the Sri Lankan government completely within its sovereignty. He added that all the scientific research activities of Yuan Wang 5 comply with the international law and common international practice. Ambassador Chi highlighted that external obstruction based on so-called security concerns, but without any evidence from certain forces, is de facto a thorough interference into Sri Lanka's sovereignty and independence. Fortunately, with China and Sri Lanka's joint efforts, the incident was resolved properly, which do not only safeguard Sri Lanka's sovereignty and independence, but also defend the international fairness and justice once again. Meanwhile, the ambassador described the visit of Speaker of the House of US, Nancy Pelosi's visit to the Taiwan region as sneaky and as a serious violation of the One China Principle and the provisions of the three China-US joint communiques. He further pointed out that the UN Resolution 2758, which was adopted with an overwhelming majority of votes during the 26th session of the UN General Assembly in October 1971, acknowledges the One China Principle and the position that there is but one China in the world. Taiwan is an inalienable part of China's territory, and the government of the People's Republic of China is the sole legal government representing the whole of China. He then pointed out that Nancy Pelosi's visit sends a serious wrong signal to the Taiwan independent separatist forces which he believes by encouraging will challenge the national sovereignty, territorial integrity, peace and stability of the region, including that of Sri Lanka's. In the meantime, he added that because Sri Lanka and China had suffered 100 years of humiliation from 1840 till 1941, China has always been supporting Sri Lanka in the international fora for protecting its sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity, and will continue to do so. He added that China will not tolerate any infringement on the national sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity of the country. In contrast, he said that some countries far or near always make various groundless accuses to bully Sri Lanka and trample on Sri Lanka's sovereignty and independence repeatedly. The ambassador then said that with the 51st session of the UN Human Rights Council due to commence next month in Geneva, where human rights issues in Sri Lanka might probably be stirred up once again. He added that as the Sri Lankan people are still grappling with severe economic and humanitarian difficulties, many might wonder what those countries who have been always preaching about human rights will actually do. Now, the President's Media Division stated that President Ranil Wickremesinghe had met with the International Monetary Fund team visiting Sri Lanka for 8 days. The PMD stated that the visiting IMF delegation held another meeting with the officials of the Finance Ministry today, where President Ranil Wickremesinghe also participated through Zoom video conference. The visiting IMF team first called on the head of state on Wednesday after arriving on the same day to the country to reach a staff-level agreement on what would be Sri Lanka's 17th rescue program with the IMF. According to the PMD, after the IMF met with President on Wednesday, it had been decided to hold another round of discussions today with the central bank officials to iron out technical issues pertaining to the EFF arrangement. Now, Japan has expressed its willingness to help set up a conference with creditors on behalf of Sri Lanka so as to aid the country to procure $3 billion expected to be received via the IMF's extended fund facility. However, sources speaking to an international news agency stated that even though Japan is willing to do so, cooperation from other creditors are also crucial. International news agency Reuters reported today that Japan is seeking to organize Sri Lanka's creditors conference, hoping it could help solve the South Asian nation's debt crisis. A Reuters source told Tokyo is open to hosting talks among all other creditor nations aimed at lifting Colombo from its worst debt crisis since independence. However, it is not clear whether top creditor China would join, and a lack of clarity remains about Sri Lanka's finances. Reuters reported that Japan would be willing to chair such a meeting with China if that would speed up the process for addressing Sri Lanka's debt, estimated at $5.1 billion. President Ranil Wickremesinghe had told Reuters last week that Sri Lanka would ask Japan to invite the main creditor nations to talks on restructuring bilateral debts. He said he would discuss the issue with Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in Tokyo next month, when he is expected to attend the funeral of the assassinated former Premier Shinzo Abe. Reuters, quoting sources, said that Sri Lanka is running out of time since it defaulted on its debt, and that the priority is for creditor nations to agree on an effective scheme. It added that even though Japan is keen to move forward, it is not something Japan alone can raise its hand and push through, adding that the cooperation of other nations was crucial. Now, former parliamentarian Ranjan Ramanayake, who was incarcerated over contempt of court, was released from the Valikada prison this afternoon after he was granted a conditional presidential pardon. President Ranil Wickremesinghe signed the document pertaining to Ramanayake's release this morning. The President's Media Division stated that Ramanayake was granted presidential pardon on the condition that he would refrain from making any comments on the contempt of the judiciary in the future. Since May this year, expeditious steps were taken by the Minister of Justice Vijayadasa Rajapaksa, as per instructions of President Ranil Wickremesinghe, to grant presidential pardon to former parliamentarian Ranjan Ramanayake. Ramanayake was sentenced to 4 years of rigorous imprisonment in January last year over a case filed against a derogatory comment he made with regard to the judiciary outside the temple trees on the 21st of August 2017. After evaluating the possibility of granting him a presidential pardon, Ramanayake made an official apology for the comments he had made by submitting an affidavit to the court yesterday, admitting that his comment was utterly contemptuous of the Chief Justice and the entire judiciary. Early this morning, President Ranil Wickremesinghe signed the document to grant a conditional pardon to the incarcerated former MP under condition that he would refrain from making any comment in contempt of the judiciary in the future. Later, the document granting conditional presidential pardon was submitted to the prison officials by Minister of Justice Dr. Vijaydas Rajapaksa and Secretary to the Ministry of Justice Vasantha Perera. As such, this afternoon, Ramanayaka was released from the Valikada prison after 1 year and 7 months in prison. Following the conditional presidential pardon, he was granted today. After being released from prison, he invoked the blessings of the Ganga Ramya temple in Colombo. Later this evening, he arrived at the opposition leader's office and addressed the media.
මේ රටේ හොරු ගැන මේ රට විනාශ කරපු අය ගැන මම කතා කරන්න කැමතියි. තේ ගොඩාක් දේවල් පීඩණයෙන් අවුරුදු මාසයක් ඕව දරාගෙන හිටියා. කිව්ව ගමන් හිර යනවා මල්ලි. ලංකාවේ හොරකම් කරන මිනිහා නෙමෙයි හිර යන්නේ බොහෝ විට. හොරකම හෙළිදරව් කරුනේ. අධිකරණ බල ප්‍රදේශයේ මගේ කොළඹ මං ඉන්න ඕනේ වැලිකඩ. මාව දැම්ම කෙලින්ම ගිහලා අඟුරු කොළ පැලස්ස. මම හිතන්නේ වෙන සිරකරුවන්ට දෙන්නේ නැති දුකක් මට දුන්නා.
This evening, Nanaikara confirmed that Ramanayaka had accepted the post offered by him to promote the welfare of the Sri Lankan migrant workers. Stay with us for more news after this short break.
Big 3.
Welcome back. Now, the US Department of Agriculture, and in partnership with the Save the Children, donated 320 metric tons of split yellow peas to nourish school children across Sri Lanka through the United States Assembly in Colombo. The donation is part of a larger one of 3,000 metric tons of food. Addressing the handover ceremony, US Ambassador to Sri Lanka Julie Chung says this donation from the American people targets the most vulnerable Sri Lankans, children, and enables them to focus on their schooling rather than on their hunger. The shipment is part of the USDA McGovern International Food and Education and Child Nutrition Program, a 5-year USD $2.6 million project aimed at providing immediate emergency assistance, the food insecure, improve literacy and attendance by reducing hunger. The USDA and its partners Save the Children work with the Sri Lankan government and local communities to ensure food reaches those most in need. US Embassy in Colombo says the donation reflects the US's larger efforts to scale up food security operations worldwide to provide record amounts of immediate emergency assistance in order to save lives and alleviate suffering. Now, Regional Director of UNICEF South Asia, George Laila Ajay, called on the international community to assist Sri Lankan families and children by investing more on education and health in order to fill the gaps which have occurred in those sectors due to the economic crisis. He made these comments while addressing a media briefing held in Colombo today. In the meantime, representative of UNICEF Sri Lanka, Christian Skoog, says he is hopeful of receiving more funds to the $25 million appeal they have made on behalf of Sri Lanka, which so far has received well over 20%.
health, education have to be safeguarded. Investments in health and education have to be protected. And therefore, I'm inviting the international community to pay particular attention to this, that any discussion should not compromise investments in health and education. Globally, Sri Lanka is number 6 when it comes to the situation of malnutrition. So our concern is that with the rise in prices, with the challenges in the food sector, with the pressures on family income, with the pressures on parents, this could exacerbate an already serious problem with child wasting. My call is for this problem to receive specific attention, targeted attention, because the consequence could be a reversal of some of the gains that the country has made in terms of mortality or in terms of child development. The crisis has really come after another crisis of COVID. We know the impact of these when kids lose time in school, how it affects their progress, eventually how it affects human capital formation, an essential component of economic growth. So we have to expand all opportunities for children to catch up in learning. In this context, as the crisis unfolds and as negotiations go on, we need to protect investments in education. It's not just about the salaries of teachers. It's about making textbooks available at all times. It's about making workbooks, stationery. It's about ensuring that the meals continue, because we know many families are now depending on the school meals. My appeal will be to the international community. This is the time that we have to come in to assist the children and the families in Sri Lanka. There's a measure we call social protection measure, and usually it could be a direct cash transfer or it could be a voucher. An important one is a cash transfer mechanism for pregnant and lactating mothers. If we miss out on this early stage of life through the mother, we might lose a big part of a generation's experience.
We appealed for $25 million for the June-December period for this year. We've received about a little over 20%. But given what the regional director is saying is that this will continue well into next year, so we will make, and we are making, appeals or calls for sustained support as we go into next year as well, because the gaps will be there and will need to be filled. We are hopeful that we will receive more funds this year. We have good negotiations with donors, but that is not just for this year, it needs to continue into next year.
Now, a fundamental rights petition has been filed against the decision taken by the Cabinet of Ministers to open up importing, distributing and selling petroleum products to selected foreign companies from oil-producing nations. The application was filed by a group of individuals including Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna Progressive Employees Union. Prime Minister Dinesh Gunawardena, Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara and other cabinet ministers, the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, Attorney General Sanjay Rajaratnam and several others have been named as its respondents. The petition has alleged that the Cabinet of Ministers has green-lighted a proposal that allows companies from oil-producing nations to import fuel and engage in retail sales market. They further accuse the government of attempting to privatize most of the filling stations owned by the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation. Through this move, the CPC and the general public will incur the massive loss, the petitioners claimed, further adding that it is also in violation of their fundamental rights. They have accordingly requested the court to issue an order preventing the implementation of the decision of the Cabinet of Ministers. Now, the National Water Supply and Drainage Board says the water tariffs will be increased with effect from the 1st of September. Accordingly, a special Gazette notification will be issued later today with regard to the hike in water tariffs. Earlier this year, Sri Lanka's state-run National Water Supply and Drainage Board sought a price increase to cover its operating costs, with unpaid arrears of 8 billion rupees also hitting cash flows. The NWSDB has been submitting proposals since 2012 to increase the charge of water. Except for 2016, the proposals have been considered so far, mainly because it could be an unpopular decision for any ruling party. Now, the UK government today lifted the travel advisory on Sri Lanka, stating that it no longer advises against all but essential travel to the island nation. The advisory included that the state of emergency currently in place is due to expire tomorrow, the 27th of August, 2022. Earlier, the UK government issued a travel advisory against all but essential travel to Sri Lanka, mentioning that the country is experiencing a severe economic crisis that has led to shortages of basic necessities, including medicines, cooking gas, fuel and food. The advisory had also pointed out that the major shortage of fuel is affecting transport, businesses and emergency services, whereas hospitals and other medical services such as ambulances may be affected by the shortages. Now, the ASPI closed in red as a result of price losses in counters such as LOLC Holdings, Haleys and Royal Ceramics, with the turnover crossing 2.2 billion. The index lost 34.69 points to end at 8,793.39, while the S&P SL 20 edged down by 2.49 points to 2,863.75. Market turnover was 2.2 billion rupees. High net worth and institutional investor participation was noted in Expo Lanka Holdings, Citizens Development Businesses and John Keel's Holdings. Transportation sector was the top contributor to the market turnover, while food, beverage and tobacco sector was the second highest. Further, foreigners closed as net buyers today. During the week, the ASPI and S&P SL 20 lost 2% and 3.4% respectively, while recording an average daily turnover of 3 billion rupees. And that's all we have for you this evening. Join us again tomorrow at the same time. Good night.